Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on behalf of Positive Coaching Alliance and USA Gymnastics. We are so excited to have you joining us. We're going to give everyone a moment to join in, but we are recording today's webinar and we will be sharing it after today's conversation. Very excited to have you here. We're going to be discussing conditioning as punishment and where the line is drawn into abusive coaching. Now, I'm really excited to have this conversation, and based on the responses that we've already gotten and the turnout that we've gotten for this, this is a hot topic because there is some gray area here and a lot of different opinions. And we look forward to discussing the impacts of using conditioning as punishment, what's productive, what's unproductive, tough coaching, and where that line is drawn as well. My name is Marty Reed, and I'm Positive Coaching Alliance's National Partnerships and Marketing Manager and former UCLA softball player, national champion. But I'm excited to introduce our panel for today. So we have Pat Fitzgerald. He is the head coach of Northwestern University football team. He's also one of our PCA National Advisory Board members. Thank you so much, Pat, for joining us. We have Shelly Goldberg. She's a former Stanford gymnast and also one of our PCA Leadership Council members. We have Melissa Reinhardt, and she is the women's gymnastics head coach at Denver University. And last but certainly not least, we have Sam Pejic, Olympian gymnast, medalist, broadcaster, and the founder of Beam Queen Boot Camp. Thank you all so much for being here and being a part of our conversation today.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, so let's just kick it off. And also those that are tuning in, feel free to drop in questions in the Q&A chat box. We will be monitoring that throughout the conversation. And thanks again for joining us. But we'd love to kick it off. Sam, what was your relationship with physical exercise in your competitive days? And how did your coaches use conditioning to strengthen your performance?
I had such a positive relationship with conditioning, I think, from an early age, because I was part of the TOPS program, and gymnastics, people watching, it stands for the Talent Opportunity Program. And so I was just type A competitive kid. So we just had a group of us that would love to compete with conditioning. And so for us, it wasn't like a bad thing. It was like, oh, I can't wait to do conditioning because I'm going to do more than you the next day. So it was always kind of building that competitive edge. And that's really how my fitness journey, I think, started in gymnastics, which I think was really positive.
Nice. That's great. Not everyone's experience is like that though as well, right? And oftentimes coaches do turn to physical punishment to get what they want from athletes. Now, Pat, can you share with us why coaches do that, and maybe what's the upside and what's the downside as well?
Yeah, I wasn't in the TOPS program, Sam, so I can't tell you that we were running for fun when I was growing up playing football. I would tell you, I think this is, in our sport, changed exponentially from when I was a youth football player to even, I've been the head coach here now 16 years, and I think there was some point maybe 5 to 7 years ago where I would say it was very commonplace in football, still when mistakes were made, to have conditioning be used as punishment. And I just think there was a diminishing returns. We worked so hard, especially at our level, to understand what it is exactly our young men need in our sport to be able to figure out physically and mentally and emotionally what they need to be at their best. And a big part of our preparation is the physical conditioning and strength and conditioning, that kind of combination, along with nutrition and sleep and the holistic way to prepare an athlete. It's really changed a lot in our sport. And so I think there were some growing pains, frankly, and maybe I guess you'd quote unquote old school would be the way it was. But as you look to now, we're using GPS tracking. We just put our whole practice plans together for training camp, and it's more all based on science than it is on feel, and it's objective as opposed to subjective, which that's really changed in a lot of different ways. So, there can be positives from it. I think, like Sam described, to where if there's an environment, and I think that's kind of where it's at least in our program right now with football, where when we start talking about doing our high-end tempo runs, guys are like, I'm faster than you, I ran 20 miles an hour, So there comes a point where it ends up being a positive, but it's a very slippery slope to being negative. And I'll be guilty. I think I was one of those coaches initially. That was the way I was brought up. And I think as time is going on and you really start to talk about maximizing relationships and development of student athletes, it's really a slope that to me goes to negativity when you start talking about punishment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Pat. I mean, I think we all can agree that physical training is a key foundation, of athletic performance, and athletes have to be mentally prepared to be pushed beyond their comfort zones. But what happens when, coaches go too far, and using conditioning as punishment can be effective, but is it always beneficial? There's a difference between being effective versus beneficial. And, I think when we think about effectiveness, we want athletes to be compliant. We want them to not make mistakes, but beneficial focuses on the needs of the person, the need of the athlete, and not the needs of coaches or parents or fans. So, Shelly, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here. How can you tell, or how can we all tell when conditioning is useful and beneficial to an athlete's physical and mental growth, and when it's counterproductive?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, I think it's a coach's responsibility to set the expectation with the athlete on why they're doing a particular activity or exercise, like what's in it for them. Because normally, I mean, in my experience, and I had a pretty positive experience, just like Sam, we were doing conditioning because we wanted to prevent injuries and we wanted to have the strength to do the skills that we wanted to do. So when it was framed as like, hey, we're doing this exercise to build this skill set that's going to help you get where you want to go, people seemed like the whole team was really bought in. I mean, we're all trying to get better. We're trying to learn new things and we're trying to stay safe and healthy. And so as long as we understood like why we were doing it, it was really, really helpful in terms of being bought into the plan, I guess. How can you tell if it's counterproductive? I think if it's risking injury anytime, there's a concern about injury, whether that's overuse or kind of extreme injury, that's definitely counterproductive. And I think there's also a mental aspect of creating an environment that an athlete doesn't want to participate in. If you've created a culture that your athletes don't want to come to, you're not going to get the best out of them. So I feel like there's like a longer term cultural piece of this. It's like, what's the environment that you want to create for your athletes?
Such a great perspective there. And I'd love for Melissa to add to that when we speak about culture and setting the tone and the environment where athletes feel welcomed and they feel, motivated to work hard, but still not sacrificing that human spirit. How do you set that culture? What are some things that you do to set that positive environment with your team?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's a lot age dependent too. So, you have to relate to the age you're working with. That might be much younger in club and obviously a bit different in college. But I know that we work hard to create that culture. So ours is to build a championship tradition that has a foundation of teamwork, character, and excellence. So we're always reinforcing that teamwork, character, and excellence. And like you're saying, we're trying to make it not just words, but actions behind the words. And of course, it doesn't mean it's always perfect, but do we have that intention? And are we trying to find ways to build that into the everyday when they take turns? Is it built into the assignment when we're wrapping up with practice? Whatever that might be. And I do think, again, age specific. Are you listening to your student athletes? Hopefully, you want to create and hopefully have an environment where there's internal self-motivation, right? And they want to be good and they want to succeed. And sure, can you get somewhere being hurt and by fear, but I don't think it doesn't last. In all my years of coaching, you might get an immediate response, but it doesn't last and it doesn't create self-motivation. And so we're looking for ways to create that enthusiasm and that passion and that love. So I do think there's definitely what Shelly said, there's a connection between high performance and staying safe and knowing. I love what John Gordon says, that love versus accountability. Of course, there has to be discipline and accountability, but there also can be love and trust. And I think if your athletes know they know they can trust you, they will do what they need to do to be successful. And I don't think you have to be demeaning or humiliating in any way, shape, or form.
Such a great perspective there. And I mean, we want to set that positive environment. We want to challenge our athletes to be better, and also set the tone at practice. Pat, can you tell us a bit more about the environment that you like to set at your practices and the energy level and what you do to make conditioning fun? Because that's a very rigorous sport, like football.
Yeah, whenever we lost one of our former strength coaches, unfortunately last year, Joe Roscoe, when he had a great line, if you're juiceless, you're useless, right? So, I think that energy and attitude are a choice, and you have to have the environment. It's already been alluded to earlier, the right culture where, an overwhelming majority of that's owned within your locker room. And then really as a coach, you're just kind of making the little tweaks and little changes that you may need to make because the athletes are going to own that type of environment. So, yeah, I like high energy. I like a lot of action. I don't think athletes like standing around. I don't think you have to, in our game in particular. I think quick, to the point, concise, what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, what the goal is of the outcome of the drill to get prepared to go into a team exercise, i.e. when we get 11 on 11, just kind of building up the individual pieces to the group pieces to the team pieces. There's a why behind all those components. And if they're not functional to the game, to me, I really think that's a waste of time. So we really try to make it a real upbeat, high energy, high intensity when we go, but then a fun environment where you can be, you can be yourself. If you want to, yap a little bit, and then you better back it up with a little bit of yapping, but it's got to be clean. It's got to be fun, and it's got to be not in a negative way, but it's more, let's bring this thing to a higher level by competing, with each other, within ourselves, but then with each other to make each other better. And I think those are the best environments because in our world, it's as game-like as possible. We walk into an arena, I'd love to say it's positive as a road team. There's not a lot of positivity, right? You're typically the villain. So, how do you handle that? How do you manage that? How do you have, that type of environment that you feel comfortable in and confident in? You got to try to somewhat simulate that in our preparation. And so, wrap it up, it would be upbeat. It would be energetic, and it would be trying to make sure everything we're doing has a byproduct of being successful when we get into the arena.
Right. And I feel like a lot of times we want to make sure that the best coaches are able to help athletes be motivated intrinsically, right? And be able to self-discipline and self-motivate as well, from a desire to improve rather than the fear of the results. Sam, can you share where your motivation came from when you had that desire to succeed and work so hard, not just in your playing days, but also in your professional career as well?
Yeah, I got to give a lot of props to my club coach. His name was Peter Zhao. He doesn't coach gymnastics anymore. And he's Chinese, and he brought that culture to the gym. And so the number one rule was respect, and we had to respect ourselves, respect each other, and respect the equipment. And if we, disobeyed, quote unquote, any of those, is when he actually got really mad. But other than that, I could tell, whenever he was disciplining us or pushing us, it came from a place of he believed in us or he was pushing us to be better. And it never felt like it always felt like he had our best interest at heart. So when he was getting on me, I was never like, oh, he's being mean or demeaning. It was like, he knows I got a little left in the tank. I need to show up for one more routine. And so I think, whether I knew it at the time or not, looking back, I think he did such an amazing job of building that trust with not just me, but our entire team to kind of support each other and push each other in the gym. And I know that, now that I'm older and kind of, hearing other people's stories, it was not always that way. But I think that I do have to give our gym credit of, gymnastics is a monotonous sport. And how do you keep young athletes interested and motivated and, excited about coming in the gym every day when they're conditioning half the time? And so, adding games to it, adding competitions to it, and figuring out a way to make it fun for them. I mean, I think that's why I'm still so passionate about this sport, is because they kind of always gave me that foundation of a boost rather than, making me hate being there. Because let's face it, we all started gymnastics because it was fun and we loved doing it. And, it gets serious at a young age in gymnastics. And so how do you keep that fire alive while still, being serious and disciplined, but also loving the sport at the same time. I think that's the biggest question.
Right. And like you mentioned, not every athlete is motivated the exact same way. Not everybody has the exact same experience underneath the same coach, right? And what if you do have that athlete that isn't living up to their potential or not working hard enough? How can coaches maybe set boundaries and consequences that foster competitiveness without putting out that fire? I'll direct that at Melissa. What are some ways that we can set those boundaries and consequences as well?
Sure. I think having clear expectations is important. Setting goals. Are you setting short-term goals? Are you setting long-term goals? Are your expectations clear? And then how are you following through on that? So, maybe it is a participation agreement. Maybe it is a meeting with the athlete and depending age athlete and or parent, and how are you discussing and being transparent about that and making sure that that athlete knows exactly that here's why. The why doesn't bother me. I know, we look back when we talk about old school and, it used to be as a student athlete, you would never ask why. But I think the why is very important, and it's to connect, because in our sport especially, there is a safety component, right? And you do want to stay safe, and you do want to stay healthy, and you do want to continue to increase your skill level. And to do that, conditioning is very, very important. I think it's probably one of the most important things you can do. So make sure that you're having that conversation and that they are connecting why you're passionate about conditioning and how this is going to be helpful, and setting that clear expectation.
Nice.
I
Yes.
just, Marty, can I jump in really quick?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to kind of hone in on what Melissa said of that importance of the why. And I think especially for young girls who are going through puberty in a really intense sport, if you don't give the why, they're going to make up one in their heads.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like, oh, they're having me do conditioning today because they think I'm fat, and whatever insecurity that they have that day, I think that it's very easily gets filled in the blank. And whether that's not true or not, now they think their coach thinks they're fat. And even though that wasn't even said, that was no thing, there was just a blank space in the why. And so, when we travel for Beam Queen Boot Camp, we always talk about how important that why is, because what you don't know, you will just guess or assume. And the least amount of question marks, especially in that area, the better.
And we did get a question from the audience. So just for you mentioning that, I'd like to stay on that page there. And, a lot of abusive coaching techniques has contributed to eating disorders among athletes, specifically in women's gymnastics. Can you speak to that, Sam or Melissa or Shelley, on how we can avoid those types of feelings starting, and how we can create a more positive environment and a positive body image for young girls?
I think that talking about what the why of, if you had a good practice, I just remember my coach being like, what did you eat for lunch? You got to eat that every single day, making it more about fuel of like, okay, we weren't allowed to practice if we didn't have breakfast. The importance of surrounding what food is doing to your body, and the importance of you being a car and, fueling your body the right way, as if you're the high-end car that we all want to be, and kind of painting that picture to gymnasts early on, so they start building that positive association to food as fuel rather than food is bad or good. Food is just food. Of course, there's certain times where, like, maybe before a meet, you shouldn't eat Panda Express, but not because it's going to make you fat in 1 minute, just because that's not going to make your body feel good. And so trying to find ways of conveying that to young athletes where their mind doesn't go in the wrong direction, but more of like a calculated strategy of fuel versus good or bad.
I love that. It's a mindset shift. Absolutely. And we have the power to instill that type of mindset in our youth. And I know as coaches, we're human as well. Oftentimes our emotions and feelings can affect our reactions, right? And decision-making. So let's say when an athlete underperforms, or the work isn't matching their potential, or they're not meeting the expectations that you set for them, oftentimes it's very easy to jump into the punishment or coercion or laying down the law to get the results we want. But how can coaches or parents, manage their emotions in those moments? I'll direct that at Pat first. What are some ways you manage your emotions in the moments where you're ready to probably flip the switch?
Yeah, I don't think that that's easy. I think that that's very hard, especially for parents, especially for youth parents. I've got 16, 14, and 12. I've attended plenty of youth sports. It's not the umpire's fault. It's not the judge's fault. It just didn't quite work out the way we all wanted it to today. There's a wonderful life lesson in that experience for your child. The most important conversation is the one in the car, right? And it's something I'm very conscious of. And again, I think it's kind of, again, a little bit redundant, but communication's key. I think it's a lost art, especially as we've gone into the COVID world, of understanding kind of nonverbal clues from your athletes and having a genuine enough relationship to see, they walk in the building, like for us, they just don't have it today. And we talk a lot about that. There's some days you're not going to have it, and that's where your teammates have to pick you up. That's where we have to do everything we can to pick you up. And then, either around our meetings or post practice, it's, pulling that person aside and seeing what's going on. Where are things at in your life? You hope they trust you enough, but at times too, they're not going to want to show weakness, especially at our level and especially in my game.
Right.
And so it might take follow-up conversations or, alerting somebody else on the staff, like, hey, seems like Pat's going through something today. Can you find something out for me? Can you ask some questions to see what's going on? And sometimes it's nothing. They didn't sleep well. They didn't feel their body the right way. And then when you start talking about performance anxiety and, the right, mental self-talk and, all those types of things, are they carrying baggage from games or from practices or, things of that nature. And then sometimes, just the player coach relationship, there's friction there at times. And that's really where I think sometimes I talk to my staff a lot about, you got to take a time out. Like, you got to take a time out. The relationship isn't working. What you're teaching and how you're teaching it may not be heard the same way you think it's being described. So you two get together, or if I need to get involved, I have no problem. I prefer you two work it out because, again, I've got a group of 112. I can't be in 112 conversations, but at the same time, just, I think of any time the coaches, they don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care, is more relevant now than ever. And, I saw in the chat, one of the questions was about conditioning. We have to condition in our sport. You have to be in an elite level condition. Otherwise, things are going to go wrong mentally in the heat of the moment. And especially in our game, outside factors are a factor. I mean, we're going to play in 95-degree heat. It is a factor if you're not in the right proper conditioning when you're carrying pads and things of that nature. So it's looking at that as a performance enhancement than it is always about you didn't do it right, we're going to go run. The run aspect's got to be about helping the performance. If they fumble the ball, then instead of putting them on the line and run, then teach ball security drills, right? If they're dropping passes, then teach them how to catch the ball right. So it's a combination of the athlete hearing you, but more importantly, you as the coach taking ownership and responsibility for your teaching, methods and commitment to having clear dialogue and expectations.
Yeah, let's stay there. Let's talk about that. Alternatives to using physical exercise or conditioning as punishment. Anyone have any advice on how we can shine a more positive light on conditioning? Because it is a useful thing and we have to do it, especially at the elite level. So what are some alternatives that we can use or you've used in the past or you're currently using? This is for anyone. Melissa, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, I think it's already been mentioned, but games or contests, or like, how can we improve the next time we did this time? What can we get to next time? Again, appropriate for the age and the level that they're at. But sometimes if you make conditioning integrated in the practice and it's not, I think that can be important for our sport. Maybe conditioning at the event that's specific to that event can also really be important. But I think for the youth, feeling like there's a game or contest behind that can be one way to motivate.
Yes, that's great. And also trying to get it to be more of their idea than just the law, right? Or something that we're enforcing on them. What are some other ways that we can motivate youth to actually desire to be participating and pushing themselves in conditioning.
Something that I did when I was training is, and you could do this with your athletes or just have your athletes do this with themselves, is after each practice, before you walk through the door, say one thing you want to improve for the next practice, and then one thing that you're proud of yourself for that practice. And in gymnastics, there's 4 events. You were probably at the gym for a good amount of time. So even if it was a bad practice, maybe the best thing about that day was your attitude when you got back up after you fell on your 3 in a row assignment or something, something about an attitude. So I know it always helped when my coach would give me his views of like, hey, the next practice, I really want this to get better, but hey, good job on this. I know it wasn't an easy day, but you kind of stuck with it and great. And that would leave me feeling like, okay, I got something to look forward to tomorrow to fix, but also like I got like a gold star for my effort today. And that mattered to me.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else have any other advice or practical ways that they can help, or we can help them make that connection?
I think for me, it always goes back to the why. And so I was thinking, like maybe you were in a competition and you face planted your last tumbling pass. And, you go back to the gym the next day and, you're not happy about it. You didn't want to face plant your last tumbling pass either. But if the coach makes it about like, hey, we need to work on endurance because I want you to nail that routine in our next competition. And because we need to work on endurance so that you can nail that last pass in your routine, we're going to do mat pushes or we're going to do whatever we're doing. But if it's tied to that goal and it's like, hey, this is a goal that's important to you. You didn't achieve the goal last time. Like, what can we do to help you achieve the goal next time? I feel like it just sets a better like environment for working on those skills.
That's great advice. And I think even a step further is having the athletes be a part of that decision-making process and setting those goals and setting, what the boundaries and consequences will be if they fall short. So when you have everyone working together on that decision, then you get more buy-in, right? They do make that choice to want to follow that and do that because they believe they've been a part of that decision-making process. So I think that's a good example as well. Are you going to add to that?
No, I totally agree. That's a great point. And it also probably depends on the age of the athlete and their understanding. Because I think at some point you kind of know as an athlete, like maybe in college gymnastics, especially, like you kind of know what it takes to fix mistakes sometimes. And you can be a part of helping set that plan for success.
I'm always impressed, especially I think I can only speak for the gymnastics world, of how mature gymnasts are in the gym. And we get some 6-year-olds at our Beam Queen events, and they do the same curriculum as the level 10s who are 17. And of course, their answers on their paper, goals for a beam this weekend, or how are you going to accomplish that? Of course, it's a little bit, not deep if work hard, but even the 6-year-olds say, I need to have a tight butt when I, get in this shape. And so it's really cute to know that even the little kids are mature enough in gymnastics to be able to set goals. And that was a good reminder to me of like, okay, you never know what these kids are capable of until you just try.
Yeah, at our level, we try to make the athlete, especially a part of the conversation. Like tomorrow we'll start our meetings and it'll be, we know the standards of the program, the expectations, but what are our standards and expectations in the DB room or the O-line room? And what are we going to, we're talking about performance. What about when we're late, right? What about when we don't go and do what we're supposed to do? So those are, where you get into a little bit of, I think, a challenge as a coach. And we'll end up talking about that as a staff. We'll talk about where we're at. And, if one group of, to me, my experience has been the players are a lot harder on each other than we are on the players. I mean, that's when your culture is right. They're going to, I'm like, no, we can't do that. No, we're not doing no. So, there's a couple of different ways, like, for example, that I've done that I like a lot is like, if you don't do those, I tell them the non-football related issues, we're just going to become the best student in the country. So I'm going to have you study more. And, I'm not using studying as a punishment. I'm just going to make you be an A student. So that's become, I think, my calling card here. If you were to ask me, like, what do I do as a coach when my athlete's always late? Well, if it's a youth athlete, I would go call the parents, right? That's a different story. But at our level, part of personal responsibility is setting an alarm, showing up when you're supposed to show up, pay people with respect and things of that nature. Number one way to disrespect somebody is not to respect their time. and trying to teach all these behaviors that you want, that are the ancillary lessons that you learn through whatever sport you're playing. You've got to still have an accountability structure. But I'll go back to when I was playing, you'd go run the stadium until, coach, I remember, you're running, come on back down, you're done, right? Those days are, at least here, and I would think an overwhelming majority of college athletes across the board, those aren't, you're not going to get any reinforcement out of it. The kid's just going to look at you like, here we go again. So, what's the reasoning behind why those types of things are happening is probably what you got to dig a little bit deeper into.
Absolutely. We are getting a lot of questions from the audience as well here. And we do want to talk about, this line between tough coaching and abusive coaching and how parents can identify when that line is being crossed. Is there any advice that you have where we can help parents identify when that line is being crossed from tough coaching to abusive coaching?
I mean, I think if, you could talk about the obvious things, if there's cursing going on, if things are being thrown, if, things of that nature, you'd obviously know it would be in front of you and it's crossed the line. I know if parents are there and are they watching, again, this depends on more a youth program perspective. But I also think, is your child happy? Like are they crying every single day? Are they not wanting to go to practice? Are they, and if there's a pattern there, obviously, we're all going to have bad days. We're all going to have challenging days. But I think really, again, we've already brought up communication so many times, but having that conversation, with your child, watching them, observing them, and recognizing patterns. And, they probably should be, you can take some pride when you've worked hard and you've gotten through something hard. But when you're crying every single day and you're begging not to go to practice, there's probably something more to look at.
Yes, absolutely. And we do talk about this at Positive Coaching Alliance, the importance of understanding what a coach's philosophy is, understanding how they're communicating to children, and reaching children and making sure that parents do see that and they are being involved. But let's talk about also, when coaches step out of line or when they do something, what would be, the first reaction as a parent and talking to their kid and having that conversation where a kid can self-advocate for themselves, or when a parent should step in and have that conversation?
That's tricky. There's no question about that. I can't obviously speak from a gymnastics standpoint, but from a football standpoint, the health and safety, especially of our game, is really paramount right now, that the fundamentals and the techniques are being taught the right way at the youth age. And, that glue that kind of keeps them, I think, involved and engaged. We talked about it, having games around our game. Everybody wants to score, right, in our game. So having the big people score occasionally makes it fun. But, I think you can go and it just doesn't look right. Like there's, your athlete keeps getting injured, or their emotion, like, you get in the car and there's a look on their face like, this is not what I want to do. Different than it's challenging and it's hard, and maybe they didn't do what they were supposed to do to get ready to practice, to where now we've got to dance that delicate line with, I love you, Pat, but we've got to go to practice today, because a month from now you're going to be in better shape. Like you just got to dig a little bit deeper to and really kind of take your emotion out of it too as a parent. Again, I'd speak from a parent's perspective. I mean, there's been some days my boys haven't wanted to go to practice. And I'm like, well, you were up all night and you went to the pool all day. So we're going to go to practice today. And you're not going to like any moment of it. And then we're going to think again about staying up all night and going to the pool next time we have practice. So there's that line, right? I think as a parent, it. And I would first ask my child if there was something that is wrong and abusive. I would think they'd probably put a wall up and be afraid of telling you. And that would just cause me to dig a little bit deeper, be a little bit more observant, maybe talk to some of the other parents, maybe talk to some that maybe played on the team before my boys did, and see exactly, is this unique? Is there something going on here? And then, obviously you love to have a child advocate for themselves. I think that's a hard expectation. Collegiate, maybe high school, collegiate. At some point, maybe as they get a little bit more confident, as they get a little bit older in their career, but for youth athletes, I think that's a pretty tall task.
Yeah, and I'm certainly, I'm not a psychologist and don't want to come across as one, but what would you do academically too? What's age appropriate for your, like, hey, if something's not going right, are they in a position they can go talk to the teacher on their own? Or as a parent, are you joining them? Are you sitting there to be reinforcing what they're saying or just listening, but they're advocating for themselves? You're teaching them that, but you're present too. Like, it's hard age-wise. I think you just need to kind of look at it, and maybe what mirrors what you would do with them in their school setting, you could think about from being age appropriate for the sports setting.
Yes, absolutely. And just for the other parents tuning in now, wanting to just give them more advice on making sure that they're selecting the right environment in club or team for their children. And what are some questions that you think they can be asking coaches ahead of time before they decide, to instill their child in that coach's care? What are some good questions that you think that they should ask and get to know ahead of time?
My personal one would be, what is your philosophy? What's your program philosophy? What do you want to accomplish through your club experience? Like, is your goal to put athletes in the Olympics? Is it to put athletes in college? It can be both. Or is it recreational based? What are the goals of that specific program? I think knowing that and asking the hard questions. How do you hold your athletes accountable? What do you do when things aren't going well and your child's not living up to the expectations? And having that conversation at the front end.
Yeah, I have a personal anecdote that's really related to that. We moved when I was, I guess, in middle school, and we were picking a gym where we were moving to. And the gym that I had been at was maybe more old school, and they had a philosophy where they would, if you didn't do your assignment well, you would get kicked out of the gym. And so I was an athlete. I had some fears. I got kicked out of the gym a few times, and it wasn't a good experience. It didn't make me feel good. It didn't help me get better. And so when we were picking the gym where we moved for middle school, like, the first question I remember my mom asking the coaching staff was like, well, what are you going to do if Shelly has a bad day? Like, what if she won't throw her series on beam or whatever? What are you going to do? And we picked the gym that said, well, we're going to keep working with her. And if that event isn't working that day, we'll go to another event. There's 4 events. And that was really important, because it's like, you're not getting better if you're not if you're not in the gym. But I feel like you can pick a few specific questions like that to kind of get a sense of what the environment is and what the culture that those coaches are trying to create is for the athletes.
Yes, and making sure that the athlete is at the center of this experience. It's not about the coaches, it's not about the parents. At the end of the day, it's about the athlete being at the center of that experience. And we do have another question from the audience I see here. And, as a coach, if I were to cross the line, say raise my voice at an athlete or use conditioning as punishment, how and when do you address that and apologize with the athlete?
It's a good question. What? Go ahead, Pat.
No, go ahead, Sam, please.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the first question in gymnastics too, since there's so many areas for risk in gymnastics. And so in talking with the Athletes Assistance Fund, there's a lot of things in gymnastics. Well, did the coach raise their voice because you were goofing off and almost got kicked in the face? Because that happens a lot in gymnastics. You're young, you're just talking to your friends, and you need to be alert and aware enough. So that's scary from a coach's standpoint. And I think that it's very valid if you're messing around for you to get a little, talking to and raise your voice, because they want you to know how serious the sport is. And I think, again, whether it's that reason or a different reason, explaining the why of why you got so frustrated and why you got so mad would kind of be, to me, the understanding piece to get the kid to understand, okay, they weren't mad at me as a person. They were just upset with the way that I was goofing off or handled the situation or was being mean to one of the teammates, because bullying happens in gymnastics a lot too.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think that, there's going to be some days that that you're not going to be very proud of and happy with. And I think, as a coach, and same thing as a player, and I think the quicker you can get to some immediate feedback, like I've got done with practice, and, as a coach, you need to take inventory of, that did not go great with Pat today. I need to go have lunch with him. I need to sit down in the office. We needed to talk about exactly what was said, the why. Listen, I should not have done what I did. Own it. Yeah, I think the athlete will respect it even more. And tell me about, have I done that a bunch? help me self-assess too. Because it's not, cooler heads are not always going to prevail, especially in our sport. And so just understanding that if we both own the relationship, then, hopefully the athlete isn't taking it personally, and hopefully you're not dishing it out personally. But sometimes that line gets blurry. And when it gets blurry is when you've really got to have that's when communication, in my opinion, has got to go up. Taking ownership's got to go up. Having understanding and empathy's got to go up. And then, sometimes those conversations end up being where you thought right hand and they thought left hand, and we're just going to agree to disagree, and we're going to move on. And especially at this level, I don't think I'm not talking about youth sports at all, because I think that's about the game, meaning the fundamentals and the techniques. I mean, I don't know. I've played on teams when I wasn't having a lot of fun, and it wasn't having a lot of fun because it was all about the outcomes. It wasn't about learning the sport, getting better at the sport. So I had more issues with that than I had a coach yelling. I never minded if a coach yelled at me if it was to make me a better player. Like I wasn't running hard enough. Run hard, like they were demonstrative. I kind of liked it. Oh, he's looking at me. She's looking at me. Woo! Like but not every kid's that way. And so I think it's just, again, we talked about age appropriate. We've also talked about, I think, communication, and then just if I just think that relationship's got to be built every day. And if it's continuing to be built every day, you'll be able to work through those challenges.
Oh, that's such great advice. Owning that relationship, that's an everyday process, right? We have to continue to own that relationship, and also being willing to be vulnerable when we do make mistakes. And I think that teaches them that mistakes are going to happen, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as we recognize them, we're able to call them out and learn from them. So you're helping those athletes foster what we call that growth mindset that we learned from Carol Dweck. Absolutely. Another question from the audience is, how can we make sure that all coaches go through training that will make sure young girls or young boys don't leave the sport with a plethora of mental health issues? I'm going to put in positivecoach.org in the.
I was going to say, the Youth Football League and Jason's out of the Youth Football League here in Chicagoland Youth Football League. It's mandatory that all the coaches take, PCA classes. So, not every high school association has that, and not every youth football has that either. But, I think that's, again, as parents, that's our task too, helping our children navigate sport. If there's not that type of training, of just being present, being observant, being there to be, their parent, and health and safety is the number one priority. And then their growth and development in the sport, and as a young man or young woman, obviously is wrapped all into that. So you just got to take ownership of it as a parent if it's not there as far as the ability. But I would agree with the link that you put in there.
Thank you. Subtle plug, but not mad about it. But, we are getting a lot of questions about mental health, which is such an important topic. Recently with Simone Biles backing out of the Olympics and for her team, as a coach or a parent, how do you deal with that situation and help, athletes overcome and prepare for those mental health moments?
I would say that's a process. And I don't think that that's a one answer type of thing. It has to work for that family and that child. And there's different things that might work for different people, whether that's engaging with a sports psychologist, whatever that might be. And I think that that's different for everyone in that regard. But I think it's on us as coaches to recognize that mental health is a really important thing. And they're not going to be successful from a high performance standpoint, right, if they're not feeling good. And so how can we support that whole person? We want them to exceed in class. For us at the college level, you want them to succeed academically. Well, even at the club level, you'd want them to exceed academically. But what are we doing in that regard? And I think that's a very individual, family-based kind of question, but on us to just recognize the importance of that and to be reinforcing the positives when we can.
Absolutely. I was sitting on a panel once, and someone mentioned, athletes don't deal with pressure. That's not real pressure. Real pressure is, if you're a surgeon about to perform heart surgery on a young child. And I was like, I hear you, but tell that to my heart and my mind and my stomach in these moments. So, thinking about dealing with that anxiety when you're stepping out and expected to perform at the highest level. We do feel the pressure. We feel the pressure, and it does feel real in that moment. So what's some advice on those moments of pressure and pushing through the fear and being able to perform? Sam, I want to direct that to you.
Yeah, when you were saying that, it just made me think of this quote where it doesn't matter if you're drowning. It doesn't matter if you're drowning in 10 feet of water or 100 feet of water, you're still drowning. And so, if you look at somebody competing at the Olympics, it doesn't matter if you're competing at the Olympic Games or at state meet, because what you're feeling on the inside is still those feelings. And so I think it is hard. And I love that there's been so many conversations on it recently, because it's a little ambiguous since everybody feels different things. And so it's hard to understand. It's hard to figure out how to help when you don't know, you can't see inside somebody else's, and especially a child. They're still trying to figure out how to put words to what they're feeling, to either ask for help, get help, or to navigate that situation. And so I think, I've taken a long, hard look at all of the mental health advocacies this year in particular. And it's something that I want to start implementing at a youth level, of building that ammo, so to speak, of you build that internal strength from a mental health standpoint, so disciplined and so tough that when you do have those days or you're struggling, you know how to get out of it. It doesn't mean that every day is going to be a great day and sunshine and rainbows, but when you're faced with an obstacle, you're faced with the pressure, you know how to, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath or whatever works for you. And you've built that up over so many years that when you get to a really big moment, whether it's in the gym or outside of the gym, you're going to be comfortable and confident in how to handle it and get through it.
Sam, I love what you just said. And I love the idea of like building that into like an athlete's training from a young age. Cause I also think like all of that pays forward so much into like life after sports, that resilience that you can develop, like the tools that you might learn to deal with those situations. And when you are the heart surgeon and you're in that situation, you just have this so much to draw on from your experience. So figuring out ways to build that in is such a good idea.
And I think
oh, please go ahead, Sam.
I was just going to say, and I don't think, coaches have a really important role, and teachers. And yeah, you might not be curing COVID, but you might be inspiring the person that's going to cure cancer or COVID. And so that's kind of how I think of it too, is, you're inspiring these kids to feel passionate about something and giving them the life lessons to be successful in whatever they choose to do in life, whether they're a surgeon or the president of the United States, right?
Absolutely.
And I would also say what I feel is it's not a comparison piece. Her problems aren't worse than mine, or mine aren't worse than hers, and therefore I don't think we should be making that comparison. What works for that particular athlete and that particular person. And I think reinforcing with your child or who you work with that being vulnerable, asking for help is a sign of mental toughness and courage, and being vulnerable is it's the opposite of what some think. Oh my gosh, if I'm asking for help, that means there's something wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with you for asking for help. Actually, that's a sign of strength, that you can turn around and say, this is what I need to be successful.
I love that, and encouraging them to ask for help, especially in those moments when they need it the most. We do have another question saying, how do you handle it when a child is taking your corrections personally? Some athletes don't like to be corrected or don't know how to take criticism. How do we help them improve in that way if they're taking it personally?
This is tough because depending on what level you are at gymnastics, I mean, if you watch an elite practice, if they're not getting a correction for every little thing that they do, they feel like the coach is mad at them. They're wanting to be critiqued, and not from a mean standpoint, but from a constructive standpoint. They're wanting to get better. And so whereas if you compare that to maybe a compulsory level practice, if you correct them too much, it's like, oh man, I can't do anything right. And so kind of having, I think that conversation with the whole group of guys, if I'm on you, it's because I believe in you and I think you're really good. And so I know when I'm coaching the girls, I always try to be like, all right, I'm being picky because it's really good, but this is what you can do better. Or just, giving them some sort of reason of why you keep giving them a correction of like, you're almost there. We're doing it together. And making it that team effort, whereas just like me against you.
Yeah, the
Wow,
challenge is, the challenge is every one of your athletes usually hears your coaching a little bit differently too.
Yes,
Yeah.
agreed.
So there's the challenge. There goes back to the relationship piece, looking at the nonverbal clues, seeing if they're actually responding to your coaching or reacting to your coaching. That's what I tell my staff all the time. A response means a corrected behavior in the direction that you want them to go. A reaction usually means they're reacting to how you're saying it and in the direction that they're taking it now personal. And that's, again, that's got to be fixed pretty quickly because that'll manifest into a problem. And it can manifest into a bigger problem across the team because now all of a sudden 2 people see it the same way, but then there's 8 or 10 that feel totally different. And now are these 2 just getting picked on by the coach? No, they're being corrected. And one of the 2 doesn't like to be coached in front of the rest of the group. So, I mean, it really takes a lot of time to just build those relationships to know, which buttons to push and when on how you're making the constructive criticism. And that's, something that I think, again, got to set boundaries when you start, like when we're going to go into these drills, I'm going to let you go play. I'm going to let you go do your routine. When we get done now, we're going to have conversation about what it was, your footwork, your eyes, your hips, your back, whatever it is. We're going to have conversations about those things. And I'm going to talk to you about how you correct it the next time. Right. And I may do it a little loud because everybody's got to hear it. Now that one person that doesn't like it being loud, you can't do it that way. So again, we've had that conversation to where that group that you're working with understands that in advance, then there probably won't be any surprises when it happens in the moment. Or when it does happen in the moment, you've got the relationship built where the athlete will be like, oh, coach, I thought you said we were going to talk about that in the meeting room, not out of practice. So, it just takes a lot of work. It just is. When you start talking about the mental side of an athlete, it is the number one challenge to a coach. It's like when you have a child and you ask them if they're hungry. I mean, they don't say anything, so you can't assume anything. So there are a lot of, they don't want to show weaknesses as athletes. And so you have to assume something's going on and then you got to try to find a way to work through it.
Absolutely. And as you can see, not all of us are from the exact same sport, right? So we understand that we could still have a conversation here about making athletes better. It has nothing to do with the X's and O's or the skills and drills and the unique, techniques that we need to be at our best performance wise. But like you mentioned, Pat, making sure that we're creating that connection first and really honing in on that relationship and building that trust. So we're able to provide that constructive criticism individually in the right way that's receivable for each kid. Did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
I was just going to say, I mean, you're right. It's so crazy because when I first started coaching, it was all about learning the X's and O's and fundamentals. Now, as I've gotten, I think, more mature as a coach, which I will readily admit, I failed miserably as a young coach at understanding all of this. If you look, I have to have Twitter because of recruiting, but I love the psyche of life. And so I'm constantly learning as a coach on how to better talk to my athletes and how to better educate my coaches than I am about whether or not this is the blocking. I pay someone to teach blocking. I'm trying to teach the mind to be able to maximize the opportunity. And, we're all retired, outstanding athletes here, I guess. I'm a part of I'm looking at a crew of amazing athlete women here. I think back to my time. I didn't operate like in the 90s. We weren't talking this way. This wasn't what was going on. And so a lot of my personal experiences weren't in this road. If I were to go back and do it all over again, I started as a psychology major. I didn't quite make it because it was a pre-med track here. But that's still an area that I'm a sponge. I love just learning how the mind works and how to, to me, the most important voice you control is a little voice in your head. And however I can teach young people how to have better positive self-talk, I think the better off they're going to be when they face adversity and or flip it over, great success, and have the humility and the courage to go back and do it even harder. That to me is what's the art of coaching beyond the fundamentals and the technique and the health and safety.
So great. Yeah, we're not just coaching the sport, you're coaching the human that plays the sport, right? And a lot of that has to do with surrendering control. Sometimes as coaches and parents, we have to step back and let athletes, make mistakes and learn from them and grow in those ways. But we're coming up on time here shortly, but would love for everyone to just share their last advice on ways to create that positive culture and make conditioning fun and create an environment that keeps athletes wanting to come back every year and continue to receive the benefits that sports has to provide.
I'll go first. I think having done gymnastics at every single level the sport has to offer, I think something that could be really cool at the JO level is implementing a good amount of things that the college teams do to make it feel more like a cohesive team. A lot of kids go to college and they say it's totally different because you're competing as a team. Well, the truth is you trained every single day with girls at your gym and it just didn't feel like that. So how can you take what college teams do well, loud but clean music for warm up and letting them enjoy feeling that grind during conditioning, we used to have super Saturdays where it was themed and everyone would come in a costume, and so just different things to team bonding activities, whether it's when you're away at a meet or just once a month at practice to make them feel more connected as a group. I think that will help support each other better. I think that's going to help kids stay in the gym more. And I think it's going to improve their overall mental health because they feel like they have more people supporting them.
Great advice. Who'd like to go next?
I'll just say, have fun. I mean, it's going to be, if you want, especially at the level that I'm at and above, and if you're going to be a collegiate athlete and above, you have to still have the love and the fun of the game and the sport you participate in. And whatever ways that we can do that, it's challenging at times, but that's probably your clue. Up, we need a day off. Well, up, it's time for a water balloon fight. Up, it's time for a hot dog eating contest, right? It's like, that's when the shift happens. We take an exhale for a moment and then we go. And, the one thing we didn't mention is when athletes are at their highest level and they don't succeed, how do you pick them up? That's probably for a whole nother talk. But to me, this is all wrapped into one big special gift, and that's the human being that we're trying to help grow and develop.
I'll build on that. I think, it's all about understanding the why is the athlete doing the sport? What are they trying to get out of it? And having the conversations that facilitate like that being a dialogue between the parents, the family and the coaching staff, as well as the athlete. And then in any ways possible, tying the work that's being done in practice to that why and creating that culture. I think that's a big part of it. And then whatever you can do to make it fun. And Sam, I totally agree. Like college gymnastics, like there's no reason that it has to be so different than club gymnastics. Like club gymnastics could do a lot of things to emulate that environment.
Yeah, I think it's kind of already been said, and it doesn't directly relate to your question about conditioning specifically, but I love the love and passion for the sport, like why you want to be in the gym. I think that that's so important. I think reminding your athletes and yourself as a coach, right? You are building life skills, like we talked about, this resiliency and grit and determination and perseverance. You're building life skills, and I think that's really important. I think the other thing that stuck out to me is reminding your athletes that mistakes are okay. Like sometimes you learn the most through those challenging moments. We all have had that during the COVID period, right? But that not being perfect is okay, and that you grow and you learn from those mistakes that you made, and how can you have that growth mindset? So I think that that's really an important point too.
Wow. Such great advice. You all are speaking PCA's language here, and we really appreciate it. We thank you all for tuning in. We are all focused on the needs of the athlete first, and surrendering our need for control and making sure the things that we're doing are beneficial, not just effective, but beneficial to the overall growth and well-being of our youth. Constantly finding ways to make it fun. So thank you all for just tuning in today. Thank you to our panelists for their expertise and their time. Really enjoyed this conversation. And like I said, it will be available for those who missed out live on the whole conversation. We'll be sending out a replay for you all to tune in again. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.